This is Think Tank. I'm Jarrell DeMattas. Welcome to all of you in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world. Migration has become a global issue that, in 2024, has reached record highs. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, estimated that there are 281 million international migrants worldwide. The main driver of migration: conflict, violence, political instability, natural disasters. As small as our twin island is, we have not been spared the global form of migration and refugee movement. Statistics up to November 2023 revealed that there were approximately 45,000 Venezuelan migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers living in Trinidad and Tobago. With our porous border security that necessarily comes with being an island nation, I imagine the figure to be much, much higher. A perennial problem we've had to face, therefore, which is the same as even the most advanced economies, is how to treat with these displaced people in a human way. Here's what I think. Our migrant strategy is a haphazard one. As I mentioned in my column, the many missteps made with the detaining of migrants and refugees underscored this. What we urgently need is a consistent way of policing, recording, absorbing, and rehabilitating displaced people in an interconnected and systematic way. We haven't learned our lesson. In the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl's destruction throughout Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley was quick to offer students the opportunity to study in our schools. But without a proper system in place to meet the goals of such a plan, if there is indeed a goal, the plan will fail. Certainly, when we consider that already there have been concerns of a second wave of migration from Venezuela, following Nicolas Maduro's win at the election last week. What wave are we really on? In order to competently deal with the influx of migrants and refugees, our migration strategy must begin with proper monitoring and record keeping to have as close to a probable number of Venezuelan migrants and refugees in this country. Once we have an approximate figure, we can then begin to provide services in a way that is systematic and careful. With the almost certainty that we will begin to see another wave of Venezuelan migrants, our best policy is one that effectively delivers on humanitarian principles of basic human rights, as well as manages our national resources carefully. Here with me today is Angie Ramnarine, co-founder of the Romaine Migrant Support nonprofit organization. Talk to us about the Romaine Migrant Support Community, the origins.
Okay, this there was in about 2018, 2019, we had reached, I think we were peaking, okay, with the amount of migrants that were entering from Venezuela, all right? And because of my personal history with so many Venezuelans, because I ran a school for the teaching of English in the 90s when Venezuela was a prosperous country and everybody used to come here to learn English. Many of those students and their families approached me for help. I started by trying to find work for those people who were coming, that great influx that happened in those years. And in finding work for the adults, I recognized that many of them had children who were shut-ins, locked away for hours, over 10 hours alone, unsupervised in households without any sort of supervision, 6-year-olds looking after 4-year-olds, and situations that was simply untenable. I decided as an ordinary citizen, one who has come from a teaching background, that this could not be healthy for children. At the same time, the Catholic Church was making all the right noises. Out of all the religious bodies, the Catholic Church was the most vociferous. And they had said openly that they were willing to educate migrant children. I found a way to get in touch with the parish priest closest to where I live, Monsignor Christian Pereira, and he embraced the idea of having a space, which we can't call a school, it's called a child-friendly space. A space where children could integrate meet other children, socialize, and in the process have some sort of informal and informal education, if you want to put it that way. Okay, so it was we created an activity space within the St. Benedict's Church, La Romaine, in 2019. And the idea of creating that space was so that other churches could be part of that movement, because the demographic was showing there were migrants in almost every nook and cranny in Trinidad. All right. And so we started with that at one point, because I believe that we pioneered this thing. At one point, we were up to 80 children with hardly any room for them, because everybody was looking for a space to put their child, whether they looked at it as a kind of daycare or someplace safe to put their child while they pounded the pavements looking for work. So it was one way of dealing with families, because we use the child as the nucleus of the cell to do social work or kind of outreach to the family. So because people had their children there, we would find out what their parents' skills were, and people would generally contact us at the church to see if they can get a plumber, an electrician, a housekeeper, and so on. So apart from it offering a space for children, we were also an unofficial employment agency. And it was our way of helping a family, but through the child. All right. So that's basically, in a nutshell, was all the motivation behind creating the group and what happened. And we found ourselves helping even in the, with medical things. And I think we really tried to, we really stretched ourselves to the max.
Yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing. Very important work. And I like how children bring families together, right? In most cases.
Yes.
So I like that. I like that. And given your exposure to families now, what are some problems that have existed, and some of the things that you recognize? Because we have our stereotypes around the migrants and refugees, but what are some things you have witnessed in terms of their personal problems?
Almost every single problem that a human being could have, right? And it's worse for a transplanted human being. Okay. So these are people, generally, the first wave, we got a whole lot of people who were very educated and very skilled coming into a society where they had to settle for less, working in department stores or clothing stores, working in supermarkets, that kind of thing, So, and working, because they were so desperate, working for wages that were rather exploitative, below minimum wage. All right. So there was that kind of employment. There was also a lot of exploitation on the workplace, because people took advantage of the fact of the language barrier, where people could not stand up for themselves. And I witnessed so many cases of people having done work and not being paid at the end of it. Okay. And even if they demanded, they were actually threatened with firearms and so on. Get lost. We don't have money to pay you. So I witnessed things like that. What exacerbated the situation was the COVID pandemic, when you had the entire population without work for almost 2 years of lockdown. So La Romaine Migrant Support, then, together with the help of the church and so on, we got together and we actually delivered door-to-door food supplies and medical supplies when needed to families in distress. But I would generally say the exploitation of the group as a workplace, and even in issues of rent and so on, while there were some landlords who were a little bit flexible, when they people, some of them were just thrown out. They simply did not have money to pay rents. They were thrown out into the streets. They had to go and seek refuge with other people, other families, and so on. They were discriminated against, and they still are to a certain extent with the medical facilities. They seem to to be seen as a drain on the healthcare system and so on. Even to initially get them vaccinated with the COVID vaccine, some people were turned away from health centers. But you see, all of this happened because there was no overarching policy to deal with migrants. For the first time in our history, I think we were in the position of a host country with a government in place, and we simply didn't have a clue as to what to do. So, with the paucity of information, how do I deal with this? Any old thing was happening, and you know, you had even at institutional level, there would be different policies in different institutions as to how migrants were treated. In some health centers, they were accepted, and others no, right? You can even see it when they go to renew their those who have their registration. Some police stations would give the character, the COC, the character, the certificate of character, others wouldn't. So there was an arbitrariness within institutions as to how migrants were to be handled anyhow, right? Those of us working on a humanitarian level, we didn't discriminate against who had a registration card and who did not. Okay, we just saw it as a population needing to be helped. All right, and we worked irrespective of that and however we could help. Other things that have happened, a lot of people who may have contributed to Romaine migrant support before COVID, post-COVID, found either their means of income totally decimated or substantially reduced, right? Whether businesses went out of business or reduced scale or people lost jobs. So people, I mean, there were very little resources, and we still struggle with almost no resources to try to do some of the work we do. All right, and I am telling you that we struggle with no financial resources to do it.
Yeah.
You know,
one of the many things he said was we probably didn't expect this level of migration because it's probably something we never had to deal with before. And that can't be a reason for not having a policy in place. So it's really now what we do from here, because that's all we can do. So in terms of, now you've mentioned the partnership with the church, but in terms of the government, and you mentioned the lack of resources, have you had any talks with the government at all for support?
I did not have the time or the energy because I knew I knew it was futile. To me, it would be futile. I'm talking frankly here, right? Because the government was talking about everybody being illegal, seeing it through the lenses of crime and criminality, that these were people coming here with a criminal record and so on, right? And so I never really looked to government. Once somebody from the Ministry of Social Development reached out to me to inquire about the work we were doing. They sounded sympathetic, but there was no follow-up. So truth be told, government would be the last place I would look to for help, right? In this kind of work, especially that when it's so controversial, people like me were seen as encouraging migrants to come. As a matter of fact, I even thought at one point they thought that I was trafficking, right? So I have kept very far from government in my quest to do the work that I have to do, because I knew that as a person dealing with government bureaucracy all my life, I would encounter more obstacles than solutions.
Yeah.
So that's being very frank.
Yeah, there really needs to be a connection between the government and the NGOs, the ones doing NGO work like yourself, because that's a critical partnership to help, because you're pretty much first responders. So you would have the best recommendations for policies. I want to go back to your sort of experience as a teacher, as a language teacher. What, in your mind and given your experience, what do we need to do better to support migrant and refugee children in particular?
Okay. Well, the first thing we need to do is to, and you wouldn't realize how big a problem this is, to get their attendance at child-friendly spaces more regular.
Mm.
Because these children are the victim of adults who are not working, who can't even afford a taxi fare. All right. Now, when La Romaine Migrant Support started, and people were contributing, we were able to pay transportation, buses to busing the children from different regions and work with them. We don't have those resources anymore, and the parents cannot even get them to a space where they can be educated, right? So that there is providing some way for them to access a child-friendly space, right? And while a school is a child-friendly space, a child-friendly space is not necessarily a school. So we have to get them, because the children are hungering for this kind of experience. But unfortunately, they're victims of adults who, in some cases, do not prioritize the child's education. Economics would trump, right? So, and as soon as a child turns 15 or 16, the child is seen as another source of labor to perhaps go out and help the mother in housekeeping or the father in construction and so on. So we need to also, find a way to make migrant, to put in the heads of these migrant parents that the education of their children is a priority, right? For too large a percentage, it is not a priority, right? And I even had one father tell me he learned a skill, he could do construction and he don't need no education, don't need no education for that. So that's the kind of responses that we get. Also remember that the parents of these children, especially the ones that are coming in the later years after the first wave, they themselves have been victims of collapsed institutions in Venezuela. So we have also a significant percentage of parents who themselves are not well educated, who may not have passed primary if they completed primary at all, right? And I can see it in their messages. They can barely spell, they can barely send me messages written on WhatsApp. Most of them opt for voice messages and so on. So to say that we have parents who would be supportive to read to children or encourage reading and that kind of thing, or even check on homework, we don't get that from the migrant parents as well. So that's the big problem, all right? Because when they actually do attend, even with the limited resources we have, pedagogical resources and so on, they do learn a lot. They do acquire. And when we think we're making progress with them, they move, right? Remember, a migrant family, these are called people on the move. These are children on the move. So if a contract is finished for a parent, let's say the father had a construction contract for 2 months and it finished, they move. They could be in La Romaine, they would move to Piaco where the money is, and then you lose an entire family. So there's no stability in a migrant family, and an education assumes a certain amount of stability and a certain amount of parent or guardian support for the child, and that is a major that is greatly lacking in migrant communities, especially this later wave. Yeah. All right, because we're seeing declining attendance at child-friendly spaces, right? Now, I guess one of the reasons it declined was some of them are really optimistic before the election. Okay. So some of them opted to send their children back to Venezuela. They felt that Venezuela was going to be rebuilt and there was hope, right? And their child not getting into schools here. Now, they did, and now their hopes have been crushed. So obviously they're going to be coming back again. And it's an entire mess, because we have children whose academic age don't match their chronological age. So you would have like 9 and 10-year-olds who still can't read or write, right? So we're dealing with basic literacy and numeracy issues before we could even talk about language acquisition and things like that, right? A simple thing, practical skills. They have $20, the taxi charging $10. How much change they have to get? We have to do those kinds of practical math skills, English, and so on, survival, math and English are survival in this new society, right? And I mean, our primary schools have a really lovely syllabus, but it's meant for children who have entered the system from day one, from introductory class or whatever they call the first class in primary school, and have a sequence building up. Many of these children have huge gaps. Some of them have never seen the inside of a classroom, right? So even this experiment of putting them in our primary schools, right? I feel sorry for our teachers as well, because they have deadlines. You know how we educate. We educate for exams. All right. So from the time our students enter schools, we preparing for either national tests and SEA and all of that. And I could see our teachers frustrated now with a new band of children, a 9-year-old or something might be going in, and they still can't read or write or spell, right? Because they have not had a sequential development in their education.
Yeah.
So it's fraught with difficulties. I think that we need to design a different system for dealing with a different system that carries some kind of accreditation for migrant children with language barriers and all the barriers that they've had.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It does seem like, your organization, we need more of them, because the point about the contract work is very important. That's a very popular employment path for migrants, and there's a lot of inconsistency there and instability there. So certainly,
yes,
I hope who's listening take note, because I think your organization provides a useful model for more like it. Angie, I want to ask you a big question. How do we become self-sufficient as a nation, so that there's not the perception that migrants and refugees are a drain on our social services and the economy? Because that's a usual line of thought.
I want to know how they become a drain when they're purchasing food, they're paying rents, okay, they're paying utilities, and they are filling in for labor shortages that we have on our own local market. All right. So okay, so I attended a graduation yesterday where the Pan American Development Fund pumped some money into training migrants up to 35 years of age in skills of electrical, plumbing, and so on. But they made it a sort of all-inclusive program. They were learning English, and they were doing practical, vocational skills. And that was the graduating class yesterday. And I always believe in education and training for self-sufficiency, because you see, also you have to remember too that where the Venezuelan migrants are coming from, in a sense, they were taught to be dependent on governments, everything, right? In its boom, many of them did not even have to pay an electrical bill. Remember when Chavez came in, a lot of them left the agriculture because he was giving handouts of something like 300 US a month and so on, right? And if you go to Estado Táchira, for instance, which was a main agricultural state, all of them left because the socialist government created a dependency. We want you to vote us, so we would give you handouts, right? So there was no real motivation for self-sufficiency or entrepreneurship or so on, right? If you're good with the government, we fix you, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of work to do to train people, and I'm talking even about our own citizens, to become self-sufficient, right? And that has to come through education and training, right?
Yeah.
And with that kind of philosophical perspective, that self-sufficiency is always the way to go. Even our university graduates, and I know so many of them because I've taught them. It's no longer coming out and hoping for somebody to employ you, right? A long time when you graduate from university, you're sure you'll get a job here, you're sure you'll get a job there. But it's also learning to use your skills and talents to create something that's will generate income and that's useful to your society.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned one really good thing. You referenced the political situation, the context that these migrants and refugees come out from. So we also have to, our own policy, again, for those listening, it would have to account for that, wean people and educate a different kind of education.
Yes.
Okay, I'll ask you the easier question. What are some notable accomplishments of your organization, and how can the public become more involved?
Well, I would say one of the notable accomplishments would be that we have found jobs for a large mass of people living in the southern area, and some of those jobs that we have found for people, they've continued to be stable in them, and are now they have now become self-sufficient in a way, so they're no longer dependent on handouts, which was the philosophy of La Romaine. We try to empower you so that you could empower yourselves. So, in terms of the handouts that we used to give in terms of food bags and so on, many people proudly come to me and say, "Oh, you see, I haven't asked you for a bag of food in months because I now have a job that's stable." And so on. And I also think a notable accomplishment was the creation of this space for children, right, which needs to be maintained, right? Like I said, I think we pioneered the child-friendly spaces in Trinidad and Tobago,
Mhm.
and others followed suit, but we were the first to actually hit the ground running with it, and I feel that's a notable achievement as well. And you know, we need now to, how could people get involved? I think people have to realize too that, okay, I keep saying NGOs exist when governments fail to deliver. All right. So we also trying to play an important role in society by ensuring that we do not have another generation of delinquents and so on, right? By trying to hone people with the right skills, to become functionally appropriate to the society they live in, and so on. And we are critically underfunded. I mean, truth be told, La Romaine Migrant Support basically runs with me alone,
Yeah.
right? We started with 4 to 6 people, and I mean, people had to drop out for various reasons, personal reasons. So basically, um, I mean, it's tiring for me to be fundraising and chasing after funds and dealing with people. I mean, my household is basically like a place where constituents come every day for
Mm.
some sort of guidance, some sort of help. I respond to over 200 WhatsApp messages a day for help in some form or the other. And yes, there are organizations like there's Living Waters, there is the UNHCR, there's IOM, but everybody is complaining about funding.
You're doing great work, Angie. And on behalf of the nation, I think we want to applaud you. This has all been great. You're doing great work. And I think for those listening, those watching, we really need to support NGOs because they are doing the work. Angie, thanks for being part of our think tank.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely. And to everyone watching and listening, stay tuned for the next episode.